G'day and welcome back to Critical AFL on YouTube for another one of my very late night reviews of a pretty flat loss to GWS on a night where it looked like we never really managed to get our head above water. For tonight's review, I'll be covering a brief overview of the match, where I think we were undone and why I don't think this will be an indicator of future performance, who our best players were, who our promising performances came from, including a new mandatory feature that came as a request last week, and that is Debutant Watch. And then finally, my key takeaways from the match. So to summarise tonight's loss, I think unlike other games where the tempo shifted from quarter to quarter, tonight just felt like one big extended block of being outclassed by a side that picked apart our weaknesses. And you're probably going to hear the word class a lot tonight because that really was the difference. The pressure GWS kept around the contest all night looked very similar to Geelong's playing style, particularly their setup, except with a lot more talent. I actually think we did pretty well to win the contested ball for at least the first half, but we never really had the chance to use it. The Giants maintained pressure on the ball carrier almost at all times, as well as all the players that were within that 10-metre radius of the person with the ball. So basically, any handballs under pressure were inevitably going to turn over, which is basically how we got done all night. It's worth explaining this because it'll go a long way towards justifying why my two best players tonight, both had only 12 possessions each. And that was because they were the only ones who seemed capable of generating ball movement from our most difficult situation, which was the inside of that contest. The other half of the equation was our inside 50s, which were just as badly suffocated as our inside ball movement. I think up until now, we've done really an admirable job of covering the loss of Jake Waterman as well as Oscar Allen, but the GWS defenders kept a step in front of our key targets tonight without a worry in the world that there was 100 kilos of marking power steaming in from behind them. Other than that, my only other contribution is that I can't help but acknowledge the performance of Finn Callahan tonight, Opposition Watch. I don't usually focus on opposition players in these West Coast reviews, but it looked like we had just no answers to his power through the middle. It was one of the more dominant performances that I've seen from anyone this year. Would love to hear who else anyone thinks has matched what we saw from him this season. But that pretty much brings me to our best players. And at the top of my list was Liam Ryan and Tyler Brockman. Like I said, both of them finished with 12 possessions, which I was kind of shocked to realise when I went through the stats after the game because it felt like a lot more. But also, like I said, on a night where we couldn't move the ball through the Giants' pressure zone, those 12 possessions each were able to generate more run than any of the bigger disposal counts that we got from other players. In the first quarter in particular, it felt like Liam Ryan versus GWS, where he picked up, I think, half of his disposals for the night before finishing with a really hard-to-come-by goal late in the game. Same goes for Brockman, who looked like he's capable of stepping around 10 guys in a phone box and pretty much had to every time he got his hands on the ball tonight. Sometimes on nights like this, it's those electric players with a bit of class who are able to do more than your accumulators. I also thought Elijah Huitt was one of our better players, collecting 21 disposals, but still operating at that really high intensity that was required to have an impact with the ball in hand. There are a lot of chains of ball movement that started with his trademark ability to hit the ball at top speed, before just something as simple as a deft hand pass in his first 3 steps that opened up the space for us to breathe with. Harley Reid was also in our best. I can sometimes be a bit hesitant to put him up there because every now and then, for every 2 good things he does, he often does one thing detrimental, sort of pegging it back a little bit. But after keeping himself right on that threshold for me all night, his fourth quarter was massive. He had 9 disposals, I think, in that last quarter. And that was just that little bit more space that he wasn't getting in the first 3 quarters that he was able to do a lot more with them. I really hope we get to see some more games out of Elliot Yeo before the season is completely over, because I can't help but think Reid's output will double almost immediately with a guy like Yeo back in the middle with him. Other guys in my best included Jinby, who, keeping with the trend tonight, was capable of executing under maximum pressure all night. Tom McCarthy, who showed a level of class that I keep referring to. In fact, I might have to go ahead and say that for a mid-year rookie who's only played his third game of AFL, Tom McCarthy may just be the classiest player in our side. But past the best players to my promising performances, I'm going to go to my same favourite as last week, which was Clay Hall. He was one of our most effective ball users tonight, and actually had 18 disposals by three-quarter time, which I know because I remember checking and thinking he's on track to rack up a pretty decent number somewhere in the mid-20s after 22 last week at that rate, before he got sent forward for most of that last quarter and didn't see the footy again. I do feel like the last couple of weeks back in the side that Hall looks very close to cementing his spot in the 23 rather than adding his name to that merry-go-round of draftees that have been cycled in and out of the waffle and the AFL side. But time will tell. At the moment, these first two games in a row that he's had back are looking very good. The other really promising performance came from Job Shanahan, who was our only multiple goal scorer with two absolute gems that split the middle from set shot. He did miss another, but in general, when I see Shanahan lining up for goal, I usually assume it's going through because he's got one of the best set shots on goal that I've seen at West Coast, probably since Mark Lacroix, before Lacroix tore that adductor. He never really kicked the same after that. Which leads me to my final piece, though, which is Debutant Watch. Someone in the comments last week asked me to include a piece on debutants, and I immediately regretted not talking about Job Shanahan's debut once I read it. This week, Malachi Champion played his first game of AFL footy, and fortunately he came on pretty early in the third quarter, getting closer to half a game of footy as the sub without anybody needing to be injured, and I thought he looked unreal. A bit like my theme for the night, he was immediately capable of operating at the required intensity to move the ball cleanly under pressure. He managed 6 possessions, and 3 of them were inside 50s. So I really hope it's a sign that he did enough to stay in the squad next week because, like I've been saying all year in the Waffle reviews, he has a really high game IQ and skills, and he kind of reminds me a bit of Willie Rioli, actually. So be really keen to see him cement his spot too at some point and reach that ceiling that I think he's got, which pretty much covers my player reviews and brings me to my key takeaways. My first key takeaway is that past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. By that I'm saying I don't expect the way we were beaten tonight to translate into any form against other sides in the coming weeks. We got pulled apart by a side that suited all of our weaknesses, in particular that same word that I keep using, class. We saw it in round 1 against Gold Coast, and that's a side that's full of A-grade talent at the right age and is just basically going to pull apart that difference in class between us once again. What we saw tonight was a series of individuals to go with a very well-coached game who we couldn't run with. You know, Finn Callahan, Darcy Jones' pace, Josh Kelly's class, Toby Green, and that's not even mentioning the accumulators for GWS, but anyone who has elite attributes like speed, power, agility, are going to exploit a side like West Coast that don't have any senior A-graders. We've got a ton of young talent who are still too inexperienced to showcase the strengths that they have without making errors. And I think what we saw tonight was every single mistake we made was basically either a goal kicked against us or cost us a goal that we could have got. We were just up against one of the biggest differentials in class tonight. And most of the sides we face for the rest of the year won't suit us as well as GWS do. My other key takeaway tonight is a bit of a cynical one, but I do feel like it's a good year for us to be bottom of the ladder, at least if it's going to happen. A bit like all that hype around the number 1 pick being Harley Reid in 2023. This year, it's about the fact that if we're going to end up with another wooden spoon, it will be very handy to take it on the year that we're most likely to receive band 1 compensation, talking about Oscar Allen, going to the draft with essentially picks 1 and 2 before anybody else in the comp even gets a look at the draftees. Like I said, it's a cynical thing to say, but I'd be lying if it doesn't soften the blow on nights like tonight. I'll be looking forward to putting out some draft content on this once the home and away season finishes. And also by no means do I think we've actually got the wooden spoon stitched up, because Richmond have really dropped off, and they're only 2 games with no percentage ahead of us. So it wouldn't take much, but it is a thought that goes through my mind on nights like this. Anyway, that's all for my review. As always, if you're watching this video and you're not already a subscriber, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Every round I put out a review of the Waffle Eagles as well as these AFL reviews, and tomorrow I'm feeling pretty confident that we're quite a good chance to win against Subiaco, just with a lot of senior AFL talent returning through the Waffle side when we already have reasonable numbers most weeks. So thanks for tuning in, and hopefully I'll see you all again for that review, where there should be a handful of guys putting their hands up to push into the best 23 next week. Cheers until then.